So, hi, Ollie. Thanks very much for talking to us. We have with us today Olly Paul, who I believe you work in community management for a computer games company, right? Is that right, Ollie?
Yep, that's correct.
Excellent. And more pertinent to our cause today, Ollie is a storied and long-time player and dungeon master of the famous tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons that we're talking about today. Ollie, how long have you been involved with the Dungeons and Dragons, and what sorts of things have you done in the game?
So I started playing D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, probably 2014, but I was also playing other role-playing games before that as well. I started playing D&D because it was the game to play. So it's kind of like drinking other soft drinks and then being like, oh, I should try this Coca-Cola thing everyone's talking about.
It is the big Coke, the big brand.
Yeah.
So what's so special about D&D then? Because obviously you've been playing other role-playing games. What does that involve? Firstly, what is a tabletop role-playing game, and then secondly, what is it that's so special about D&D that's kept it going, despite computer games coming along and becoming a big thing? I've heard.
Yeah, so it's different because you sit around a table, first of all, and you look at each other in the face. So that's one thing that it brings, that kind of nice social element to it. But you're essentially just telling a story together and using dice to make the decisions to see if you can do stuff that might be hard to do. So fighting monsters and persuading people and intimidating people and finding things that are hidden. And one player will be a dungeon master who will tell you what happens and move the story along. But the best sessions are the ones where they're also completely in the dark about what's going to happen.
I guess there's that random element of how it can develop.
Exactly. And to your second question about computer games, I think there's still no computer game that can replicate that feeling of you say exactly what you do in that exact moment, and you can do exactly that thing. You're not picking from a selection of actions or text boxes. It's,
and that's because you have the human dungeon master who can basically think it through and creatively work out what would happen, right?
Yeah, if you want to sort of flip off a knight as he walks past, you can totally do that if you want, and the consequences will be told to you, whether they're positive or negative.
And you have to take a hand in making them either positive or negative, I suppose, as do the dice. Well, you mentioned that it's played again. One of the things that makes it so different is that it's played in person, sat around a table. It's a social experience. I don't obviously have to remind readers/viewers that we're doing this interview via Zoom from our homes, which is the only place we're allowed to go currently because of the coronavirus pandemic. Given that D&D is so traditionally sated in this like social experience of being sat around a table, traditionally, in a basement with lots of soft drinks, Coca-Cola optional. How can you replicate that right now? Because people are. How does that work? How can you do such a social game that relies on lots of physical dice and all of the papers and pens and all sorts? How does that work online?
So there are sort of ways you can roll dice online, and there's obviously Zoom and Discord and ways you can do video calls, but there are also websites and programs that will simulate the tabletop itself with 3D dice that roll on the table and little figures, and you can have little castles that you can build and notes for the GM, the dungeon masters, that they can pass to other players, and music, so you can have the cool music in the background. And all that stuff's that's the stuff that I started to use when I first did this, because I was living in Berlin and it was a way for me to keep in contact with my English friends. And so we would just jump on the computer and play role-playing games online. So actually, this is, for me, this is normal.
So you had a lot of experience with remote remote tabletop working and playing before then.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you perhaps more prepared than the rest of us for the last few weeks.
Yeah, and also I know the strengths of it, especially when people are so spread out across London. You know, it takes an hour and a half to get to one central place, and you have to pay to be there, to pay to get there.
Yes.
So sometimes it's nice to get home from work and just, you know, stay at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially easy to do that when getting home from work, you're already at home. But
Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, so you can do it at a distance, and people are doing it right now. You have experience with that. How does that differ from playing it in person? Does it change the game? Does it change what you get from it?
I think so. I think sometimes if you, especially using the programs that create these maps and grids and tokens, and it starts to digitize it to the point where it becomes like a board game or even a computer game. And you notice the players are focusing so much on what they can see, they're not focusing on their imagination so much. So which is, and also it's harder for me because I'm trying to create this imaginary world, and they can say, well, actually I can see that's not true because I
I
can't see it on
suppose
there on the screen.
it makes the artificialness of it a bit more obvious. A problem with suspension of disbelief, maybe.
Yeah, and also if you have sort of 5 people shouting at once, uh, Zoom, for example, will probably prioritize a voice for some reason.
Yes. Okay.
So sometimes the most fun moments are hard to match. Also, you have people who share houses with people, other people, so they may not feel as comfortable doing funny voices and things, and getting distracted, as opposed to being in a game shop full of other nerds.
So, in effect, you face a lot of the same challenges as people trying to replicate their work attitude and their work practices
pretty much, actually,
over Zoom, because they have the same challenges of their home environment being around them and the people they share their home with, etc. But
exactly.
But there's an upside, right? Do you think that playing D&D, as opposed to any other activity that you're currently allowed to do in your house, do you think that it can be beneficial for people that are living through this? Well, all of us, I suppose, but for people that are living through this kind of isolated situation?
I think so. I think you can get so immersed in it, in what you're doing. It's kind of that it sucks you in, like being around a table with your best friends. You're never gonna, your mind's not gonna drift off, right? And it's like that, but even more so because you're immersed in this action, not like what you're doing at this moment in time, and the character that you're playing, and the other characters. And I think from start to finish, you won't think of anything else. And you don't really get that from a lot of other activities. You don't really get that from TV or film. I mean, maybe, but I think having an active part of it and being with other people as well stops your mind from wandering off to.
Yeah, I suppose it's easy. We're used to a lot of distractions now, and people are always talking about the advantage of any given activity often being measured in how well it can hold your attention and how long it can hold your attention for, which is one of the things that has come up a lot. People talking about doing pub quizzes and group quizzes over Zoom and Skype and all these house party and things that people have suddenly started using a lot more in this current time. So I guess D&D has that same quality with a little bit more depth and engagement, perhaps.
Yeah, and you're also working together to solve puzzles and problems, and you can play a character who you really want to be. If you're going to get really, if you're going to feel great for slaying monsters or persuading people your side of things, or I don't know, solving a puzzle, solving a mystery, solving a murder mystery or something, like you can do that exactly the way you want. You can be any character that you like.
Yeah, so it's the ultimate escapism in that way. And I guess we need more escape than usual.
Yep.
Um, well, that kind of links into the psychological kind of side of things. Obviously, one of the touted benefits of quizzes is not only the fact that it holds your attention and takes you away from your devices for a while, although in this case we're having to do it through a device, but generally kind of switches your brain on and focuses it in a beneficial way. Do you think that D&D has any particular kind of social or psychological benefits or kind of negative effects, I suppose, that you've seen before from yourself and other players, like before this isolation time, and also potentially in the games that you've played since?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the downsides, because I don't think there are that many. I think all the downsides come from potentially becoming too invested. Like sometimes I feel guilty for thinking about a made up world. And I'm not thinking about real world stuff that's really important. I'm just thinking about, I wonder if I wonder if that character should turn out to be a bad guy. And yeah, you know. And obviously there's some kind of echo chamber sort of stuff that can happen in such a closed off community. But I think it's because of the internet and social media, it's gotten much more broad. There's a lot more diversity in D&D compared to a lot of other nerdier hobbies, because it's really easy to just role play a character and just have fun with it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of positives. I think the social side is understated of how important that is, especially considering so many kids are playing games on their phones all the time, and having face-to-face time, I think, is getting more and more important, and working together as well, not being competitive but working together.
Yeah, and I suppose, like any of these kind of games that are traditionally played in you have to be in a group with people that you're interacting with in real time. It deals with loneliness as well, right? There's a lot of people that suffer from problems of kind of social anxiety and awkwardness and struggle making friends, and therefore have psychological problems with loneliness in normal times. And historically, games like this have been positive for those types of people. That's kind of one of the ways that it's become associated with kind of nerd subculture, is these are people often who have been outsiders from their social groups, and then they kind of come together to do things like this, and it becomes nerddom. But right now, all of a sudden, a whole load of people who would not kind of count themselves part of those groups might now be struggling with those same psychological problems, right? Like, we're all trapped in our houses. Extroverts, especially, who need psychologically need all of that contact, now don't have it. You know, do you think there's a possibility that that D&D, which has actually become much more popular in the last 10 years with the rise of board games and tabletop games in general, could have a resurgence in this time?
Yeah, I think so. But also for introverts as well, who would struggle to pick up the phone and call their friends, because they don't want to talk about themselves or how they're feeling, or they don't want to talk about that stuff. They want to be in contact with their friends, but just to do something fun, and just to have something to focus on. So I think that part of it's, important, because if you're doing stuff with your friends, that like hobby-based stuff, you have a reason to talk every week. So even if you spend half the time not playing D&D, you just end up chatting. It's still okay. And it's an excuse to have a beer and relax a bit. Whereas someone whose friendships are just based on, I call you up, and you call me up, and we say what's happened in the last 2 weeks, and that's it. It's a bit harder, I think.
They've got less to talk about because none of us are doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's certainly, something that's going to have interest to lots of people looking for activities right now. If readers of this, or people seeing this interview, want to try it out for themselves. I mean, you've been playing this game for quite a long while as a player and as someone who runs the game, so prepares all of the environments and the other kind of characters in the world that they interact with the human players, and all of the dice and all of the sums and all of the pictures and maps and all of that gubbins. You've been doing this for a while. And also you run a YouTube channel with videos about how to play the game and how to do that side. You must have interacted with quite a lot of people who haven't played before, but are just interested. What kind of, if people have just heard of it, or just kind of have heard of it but weren't really, didn't think it was for them, but now they're suddenly scrabbling around for something to do, what kind of advice, what would be your first steps for a new player to get into D&D?
I think do a bit of research first. Look at some YouTube videos. The D&D-Beyond.com is a great website, has some great starter information on basically what the game is, first steps. And then once you've sort of got your head around it, I would talk to your friends, ask who's interested, try and pitch them. If you know them well, you know which bits they would be most interested in. If they're gamers, they would like the combat-y stuff. If they're born again actors, they would love the role playing bit. And then you would have to decide whether you would be the dungeon master, or if somebody's going to be even more excited than you, they could probably do it, or you could try and take turns. And then I would just jump onto something like roll20.net, and you can buy the starter adventures in there, and it will give you all the maps, give you all the tokens. So it's really easy to run. It'll give you all the information.
And Roll20 is one of these online platforms to play the game, right? So you can have it tells you how to do it and invite people and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's free to use. The module, the adventure itself, is quite cheap, the beginner one. So ask your friends to help you buy it. You can share the cost. You won't have to buy any dice or anything. And then you can always go to my channel, Dice Encounters, for information on tips and things. Sure. If you get into it, then it will take over your life.
What a way to end. Thanks for talking to us today, Ollie.
No worries.